Um, so let's go ahead and get started. We are here today to check in around some of your thinking, as well as share some strategies about how we can facilitate remote learning or distance learning for those of our students without regular access to technology. And so we'll go ahead and continue that discussion by looking at two particular outcomes. First, as we've done in the past few sessions, we want to make sure that you can identify some practical strategies for supporting remote learning for all. But today, especially toward the beginning and throughout the session, we want to make some space for you to identify some local strategies as well and share some of those. There are a lot of differences in the sites we work with, but there are also lots of similarities that we see as well in terms of for example, similar SES levels or similar access to technology or some of the same hurdles that you're facing. And so, though your local contexts are unique, you're not in this alone, and there's certainly things we can learn from our colleagues across the country. Our ground rules are the same as they have been. If you're new to us, we'll always begin and end on time. So if we will end at 4 today, honor your time. You committed this hour to us, and we want to make sure that you get the most you can out of it. During our conversations, especially when we do unmute you, please stay focused and be respectful of the thinking that everyone has to offer. And please also assume positive intent. We're all here for one reason, and that's to think together and learn some strategies about how to do better, even better for our kids in this situation. And so as we're speaking our own truths, speaking our own experiences in this situation, know that we're all coming from a positive place. We all want to do what we're doing even better. Please use the chat feature for questions and responses, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. And please, as Anissa kindly did for you at the moment, mute your microphone when not speaking, and that makes it so you don't have to hear your 5-month-old having a meltdown in the background. But I digress. Here we go. So talking a little bit more about chat, please share questions and ideas in chat. We'll both cue you to, but as those of you who have become our regulars, so to speak, you know we highly value those back channel conversations. So please keep talking, please keep learning the background, and we'll respond to those as we can. Though you have questions, we may not respond to them right away. We will look for logical pausing points throughout the presentation to pause them. We do have a Q&A session built in at the end. And in follow-up communication, we'll also take opportunities to respond to you if we cannot do that within the confines of this hour. We also want you to know ahead of time that this chat will, so everything you're typing will be recorded and saved as well, and that allows us to conduct that follow-up. But also allows us to compile any additional resources and ideas that you share for later distribution. So if you are someone who's joined us, for example, last Friday, and you know there's some conversation around the Google certification, we were able to go back through and comb through the chat and say, oh yeah, people really did want that link. And so we were able to send that link out to you in that follow-up message. So that's the reason why we're saying recording the chat, just so we can make sure that we are responsive to all of your wants and requests as you interact here with us.
And so does everybody see where the chat is? They either see the button at the bottom that says chat, it looks like a little talking bubble, or you already have it open. Just double checking and making sure. If you don't, then Randy, if it's okay, I'm gonna unmute everybody real quick and see if there's anybody that needs support, and if not, then we'll just keep on going.
Okay.
All right, so yell out loud and proud if you need some help with the chat. All right, I think we're good.
Okay.
Because we absolutely want to make sure, especially today, that we get as many ideas out on the table, either through the chat or when Randy or I have us share out actually talking. So thank you guys so much. Okay, Randy, back to you.
All right, thank you. And let's go ahead and move forward. First thing we want to ask you to reflect around a little bit, and this is where we want you to, I just got a notification that just unmuted me, so I'll start that sentence one more time. The first thing that we want you to reflect around a little bit in the chat to practice using that feature as we go to prepare for the remainder of the session is to talk a little bit about this question. What are some strategies you are currently using to support students without regular access to technology? Be that paper packets, be that some other method, how are you supporting learning for those folks? Please feel free to go ahead and respond in the chat about either what you are doing as an individual or what your district or school is doing. Okay.
Randy, one of the, there's a lot of really good ideas. I see a lot of paper packets because we were trying to get something out to the kids as soon as possible. I see some information about like home delivery, which Tim, I find that interesting. Later, if you want to talk about that, I'll feel free to. And Liz Schilling shared about scavenger hunts on the phone. So I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about that as well. And then we also have some setting up office hours. So again, just trying to make that connection in time for the kids.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to give some floor space to those folks.
So you guys should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Tim. I'm from Gold Beach, Oregon. Our school district is about 900 square miles. And so we have big pockets of our population who don't have regular access to technology at all. And so twice a week, we're doing home delivery of our meal program. And then we use those same routes to come up with a once a week home packet delivery. So essentially our instructional assistants are put together the packets. They're a weekly packet, and then on Wednesdays we deliver, and then on the following Wednesday we pick up. It's been appreciated. It's probably 1/3 of our school population has taken advantage of that. We're also finding that like many of your students, online's not always the easiest way to do it, and there's some comfort in paper and pencil, especially if you're getting access to the online lesson, but you don't have printer, as an example. So all of the worksheets or other materials are difficult to utilize. So if the school is providing that, then that's really been a benefit. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. And I think the home delivery is certainly one of the more innovative solutions we've come across. And as Anissa and I were preparing for this, we'd really hoped you were joining the talk so you could talk a little bit more about that. So thank you for indulging us a bit today. But what you also bring up is that point about the printer piece. Just because students have access at home doesn't mean they can't do the work, right? And so that's another barrier. And so when we are able to provide paper packets or some sort of work in whatever medium we can, that certainly takes one less reason or excuse out of to not engage with the learning away from kids. So thank you for sharing that. Anissa, was there someone else that you said you wanted to, you were going to ask to elaborate on?
If Liz Schilling is willing to share, I was going to, curious about the scavenger hunt that she had mentioned.
Yeah, so for science, I've decided to do scavenger hunt, going with whatever topic I was doing for the week. So this week we were talking about Earth Day, so we did an Earth Day scavenger hunt. So I posted it on my Google Classroom, but for those that I know still don't have Chromebooks or don't have the technology quite ready, I called them and gave them the 10 things to find. So some of them were just like find a product to recycle, find a recycling sign, things like that. So I was able to just call them and they wrote them all down. And then once they find them, they can either like text me a picture or just text me and tell me they found it or something like that.
That's awesome. What a great way to like get the kids engaged and still connect to the lessons that you're doing. Fantastic.
Thanks.
Okay. As we hear those examples, is there anything else that's coming to mind that our folks would like to share before we move forward? Okay. Then we'll hopefully we'll share some additional ideas here as well. Things that may not be new to you, but definitely new in this context that we find ourselves in. So we'll go ahead and move forward here. The next question asks us about some of the mechanisms we're using to distribute and collect materials, and I think we started talking some about that with the home delivery routes. A lot of you mentioned using food distribution sites to leverage some of that that contact point. Some of you also talked about I saw Bryce Frazier talk about mailing packets home, where that's an option, depending on the cost associated with that. So I think a lot of those mechanisms have already been addressed. If there's anything that we haven't addressed or anything you'd like to get off your chest, please feel free to leave that in the chat. And we'll pause in a moment for a bit of a collection point around that discussion as well. We do want to, as promised, share some more practical strategies for you as educators to take away that you might use to support students at this time, especially those students who might not have consistent access to technology and whatever that means for them in this particular context. So the 4 big things we'd like to take a look at today are encouraging journaling, which is something we talked about when we were together last Friday, for those of you that joined us. But here we're going to go a little bit deeper into that and talk about what that means, especially in a context where we might not have regular contact with some of our students. We'll talk some in this session about authentic independent reading, knowing that there's there's always more to say about authentic reading, and that probably does require a topic of its own, which we have scheduled for May, and we'll be publishing that calendar and send that out to you a little bit later this week. We'll talk some about fostering reflection, how important that can be as part of the learning minutes our kids have set aside for each class. And we'll also talk about performance tasks, knowing that there's also a lot of design considerations involved with those. And this Friday session is really all about how we use performance tasks to really guide both learning and assessment for students who both have access to technology and for students who don't. So while we will do a surface level dive in performance tasks today, we'll really spend Friday really digging deeper into that. So if what we share today really interests you, we encourage you to join us Friday as well, or at least to register so we can get you a copy of the recording once the session is complete. Enough shameless plugging though, let's talk about the 4 strategies in a little more detail. First one we want to talk a little bit further about is journaling. And there are 2 ways that traditionally we have instructors have gone about journaling. Down the left side in orange, many times we offer stimuli for our students to respond to, whether that is a writing prompt, whether it's a set of math exercises, whether it's a scientific question we're asking them to pose a hypothesis to, or whether we're asking them to respond to a short text. And that text doesn't have to be written text, it can be an image, it can be a graph, it can be a chart, something that encourages some thinking. When we provide those stimuli, we want to get our money's worth out of them, right? Especially if we know we're not going to see them over the course of a week. So it might be that we ask them to write about that topic in a few different ways. If I'm in a math setting, for example, I might give them a problem that has multiple ways to work out a solution, and ask them to both work out that problem, but describe the thinking behind working that out for each of those strategies that they used. In science, I might ask them to track a phenomenon over time. This is a great opportunity to do any weather and climate studies because that's something everyone can write about as they look out their window. So it's an opportunity to do some recording there and do sort of some impromptu lab work as well, and hypothesize about what's causing some of those changes based on what they know or don't know. But it also really allows them to make their thinking visible in that moment as they're journaling as well. Also, when they respond to text, as I'm looking at the last bullet point there, as we know as our ELA teachers know, identifying text to text, text to self, and text to world connections can be helpful, but that's also helpful for any disciplinary specific text as well. So if we're in that science classroom where we're trying to find connections between climate and latitude and longitude, for example, we might be able to draw some of those connections through using these stimuli to generate student thinking. On the right side, we might have more independent responses, which are those true free writes. In this setting, though, while we do encourage students to write and just get in the habit of being good, fluent, authentic writers, we do know that it's sometimes helpful to identify specific skills to work on. So if they're working on introductions, transition, if they're working on supporting claims with evidence, that might be something we want them to key in on as they are drafting their free write responses. And creative writing doesn't necessarily mean that you have carte blanche to write about anything, right? We might ask them one week to write a mystery. We might ask them one week to write historical fiction as they engage in some of that journaling. So it doesn't, though it is a free write, it can be a free write with some sort of defined autonomy as students make choices about what they want to do. No matter which type of journaling you choose, though, we think two things are important to do to help make your expectations clear, and also to help make sure students are getting the most out of that journaling. First thing we encourage educators to do is develop a scoring guide to set and communicate clear expectations. So what does a good response look like? If on a free write, is it acceptable that I only have one line or a few lines, or do I need something substantial there in order to show some evidence of my thinking or some evidence that I'm working with my skills? So what might that rubric look like that helps me really say what a quality response looks like? We also encourage educators to think about how and when student work and thinking will receive some feedback from us. And there's some ideas listed for that in parentheses there, whether students have two journals and they exchange them back and forth at food drop points. As someone mentioned in chat earlier, they're texting or uploading pictures of the journal to your LMS. Or as some of you already mentioned in chat, there's a weekly check-in call that some of you are using to talk to some of your students. That's a fantastic opportunity to talk to them about some of the journaling they're doing as well, and to really probe their thinking and see what evidence we can gather of their learning and of their thinking at that time. So all of those are great ways to use journaling. All of those are different types of prompts and different types of strategy we might use to get students involved. But it's only one of the 4 strategies that we wanted to bring forward here. The second strategy, and again, there is much more to say about authentic independent reading as we go forward, so please stay tuned for a further date on that, but we wanted to start with this entry point. The first thing we want to be mindful of is prescribing an age-appropriate minimum time to read. At the elementary level, that might be 15 minutes per day. At secondary level, we might go as far as 30 minutes per day or more. But we do want to make sure that no matter the content area, students do have access to some of these authentic texts. So we've compiled a list of some free sources, or at least free for the moment, as everyone is providing resources during this time. And we will certainly email these out a little bit later, but certainly look at your textbook publishers and see what they're able to offer in terms of online access, or in terms of supplemental things we might be able to order. And for supporting some of our students who don't have access to text, or you can't access your classrooms in order to get some of the text you have, Project Gutenberg or EPIC are great resources for either secondary or elementary. They have ebooks that you might go ahead and print and distribute to some of your students who don't have access to technology. Same with New Zealand. You might be able to print some articles there to provide to your folks, and same with the New York Times Learning Network. For those of you in ELA who are interested in young adult fiction, so secondary ELA, Goodreads has young adult lists for free published, and those young adult lists all have free ebooks that you can download as well, and might also share with some of your students via print or other means that are available to you. So in any case, we do want to provide them some choice of text. So that could be a free choice of text from one of the sources we just mentioned, or your own source you have. You might confine that to a specific genre, saying this week, I really want to focus in on biography. So you can choose any biography you want, kids, but let's focus on that. Or you might even get more specific and have a few texts on a list that you ask students to choose from. In AP Human Geography, for example, one teacher I know worked with had kids look at Super Size Me, as well as some other books around the food production, because to help reinforce their study of the agriculture unit. But it was this really narrowly defined set of texts that students could choose from. As we're thinking about authentic reading, we want to make sure we're talking with kids about how, what, and why we as good readers read, which means we might have to think about how we're going to read and model some of that good reading, good thinking that we do as readers. So when we're selecting a text, that might mean that we're recording and distributing that think aloud via thumb drive or some other method to really get kids involved and expose them to some of that work that we as experts in the field do. We might also want to record a book talk and distribute that, or at least write some talking points about why some of these books are more interesting and what might pique their interest about different kids, or to different kids rather. And we also might want to highlight some of the nuances of particular genres. So if we know, for example, we're going to limit selection to biography for a week, we might want to, highlight some common textual features, whether that's through a packet or otherwise, to really get kids familiar with how to read that sort of text. We also need to think about how students might be monitored, assessed, and supported throughout that time. And so journaling is a really natural pairing with that. If students are reading and responding to that text and making their thinking visible through that writing, that's a great partnership of strategies. So we're working a little smarter in that case and not necessarily harder in thinking about how to address some of those skills. As Ms. Schilling mentioned earlier, facilitating phone conferences is a great way to check for understanding, not only for scavenger hunts, but certainly for whatever it is that students are reading here. And where possible, when they have opportunities to engage in sharing about their reading in an authentic way on Amazon or on Goodreads, for example, in creating book reviews, that's possible as well. We know that inconsistent technological access doesn't always mean no technological access, although for some of our students that's very much the case. So that's very much a judgment call on the part of the instructor or of the building to decide what might be a reasonable expectation at that point. But lastly, we also want to give students an opportunity to talk about what they read. So we might ask them to log some conversations with others in the household and give some discussion prompts. Saying, I read about this, Mom and Dad, what do you think about that? We might also facilitate, for those of you who are doing some phone check-ins, if you are able to get two kids on the phone at the same time as part of that check-in and have a discussion with their peers about what they're reading, if they have to be reading a similar text or even the same text, that might be a helpful way to facilitate some dialogue as well as to maintain some of that sense of community from our classrooms. So it's a lot of talking, and those two strategies are fairly dense. We want to give you, as always, a chance to process them and to think a little bit further about them and share what's coming up for you right now. So please take some time in the chat to respond to any or all of these questions. As you think about those two strategies, what seems doable right now? What might seem like a challenge for you? And why might these things seem either doable or challenging at this point in time? Anissa, what are some things you're seeing in chat?
Sorry, I am reading them right now and I had to take off my mute.
Okay.
So Nicole was talking about how ReadWorks, usually those articles are doable because they're really good at having them on grade level or below grade level. And they should be able to access them not only on the computer, but also on their phone. And the challenging, Destiny was talking about all of the reading outlets. But once you find a comfortable site, like she was mentioning ReadWorks as well, the kids enjoy them. And I think that's something really important to remember is we're trying to give several different ideas, but it's never ever expected that we're all using all of these things because it's just too much. Somebody had mentioned last we're just getting inundated with all of these resources. So it's finding a couple of ones that work for you and for the kids so that you have consistency as well as them. If we're trying to ask them to get onto all these different websites and read all these different things, they're not going to be successful either. So just find one or two that works for you.
Okay. I'll give just a few moments for any other chats to filter in as they talk, as you think and respond to these.
And Brandy, another challenge that's come up, which has come up every time, and it continues to be a challenge for everybody that we talk to, is the student participation. And that's across the board, whether you have them on Google Classroom or whether you have low-tech kids. And I don't know anybody yet who's found into that, but if you've got some good ideas, definitely share them with each other, because I think part of it is the fact of when it happened in the year and the messages of, are they being graded or are they not being graded? Do they get credit? Do they not get credit? And we'd love for kids to want to learn just because, but we know some of them need that outside motivation as well. So yeah, any suggestions or things found to try to get the participation up, we would love to hear so we can share as well and just kind of cross-pollinate ideas. And Deborah had a really good idea about reading a story to the kids. So in other words, filming yourself or you know, either a video, an audio file of reading the kids and using that as well. So that it's not always the kids doing the reading. I know Michelle Obama for younger kids, for elementary folks, is doing a Monday night, I think, bedtime story. So I have a feeling there's some other people as well that we may be able, it doesn't always have to be us that makes those videos. It's the found videos as well that we can use.
In any case, what we have to be mindful of, especially given the topic of this session, is that we want to think about how our students without regular access to technology might be able to access those. So if we are able to download copies of them and perhaps distribute thumb drives or I don't know if people still even do these, but CDs or whatnot, or if computers have CDs at this point, or CD-ROMs at this point. But whatever we can do to help, get those videos in people's hands is great, right? It's one thing to have all these great videos, but we also must be mindful of those folks who don't have regular access to some of these great resources that we're talking about here. We do have two more strategies we want to share as we're looking at that, being mindful of your time here and mindful of the opportunities we want to build into here some more of your ideas. So we're going to go ahead and move forward here. One of the other strategies we can take a look at is fostering reflection, and this is strongly connected with journaling. So if you're seeing a theme here, you might, but it doesn't have to be necessarily limited to journaling. It might be related to individual assignments that we do as well. One thing we can think about and we want to stress though is reflection doesn't always have to happen after learning. It can happen throughout the learning. And it doesn't always have to happen at the end of of an extended task. It can happen at the end of a set of math exercises. So if I were to send home a set of practice problems to my students, I might also send home a reflective prompt, like some of the ones outlined below. I could ask them to think and document what went well for them during that assignment. So what strategies, techniques did they use that help to seem to help them solve those problems? What were some things they might do differently next time? And some students might just say, well, I'll know it better, I'll do it better. But it's an opportunity for us to probe that thinking and to extend that thinking if we have the opportunity to provide some feedback to them as well. Where we have provided some text that might challenge some of their viewpoints, or some texts or some stimuli that help them really dig into things from a few different perspectives. We might also ask them to write and share some reflections around how their thinking has changed. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a worksheet that governs the response to a text or whatever it is we're sending home for students to work on. They can be some of these more open-ended questions that often elicit more deeper and sustained thinking from our kids. We might also ask students to respond to teacher comments and feedback. So we know that there's going to be a little bit of a time lag from a student gives us work, we give it, we have a chance to get it and grade it and then redistribute it back to them for that feedback. But in the case where we are, for example, having an extended essay or an extended performance test that kids are working on, having that feedback as they're continuing to work is certainly helpful as they continue to grow and complete that. Similarly, if we're expecting them to write perhaps several smaller essays over the course of time, having feedback on that one essay, that first or second essay, and being able to respond to that is really powerful, because that lets them know lets you and them know that they have a path forward to do that next essay or doing that next response even better. So whenever we can engage kids in reflecting on the feedback that we offer to them and asking them some probing questions, whether they are students with limited access to technology or students in our technology-rich classrooms, it's definitely a valuable practice. Lastly, we want to talk about performance tasks. And this is a bit of a preview of what we'll talk about more in detail next session. But for performance tasks, we're talking about sustained exercises that last over the course of several hours or a few days. So this is not necessarily something, a worksheet that you're getting done in 10 minutes, but it might be something that you're working on in segments over the course of a week or over the course of 2 weeks, where we might have the opportunity to provide some feedback to them. And there's 3 key questions that we ask educators to consider when they're designing this performance task. First, what are students supposed to do? So they might have to identify a problem that they see going on in the world around them and really construct and articulate the problem. And that same thing with posing a scientific question for them that might be helpful as well. As they're working to identify those problems or pose questions, that's an excellent opportunity for us to feedback and have some dialogue with them to really refine their thinking to set them on a path for future success. We might also just give them a task and say, here's some common household materials that you might be able to find. Tell me how to, to knock this ball over or to knock this pin over at the end, to make this Rube Goldberg machine with what you have at home. We might also pose some problem-solving scenarios for them to think about as well. All of those are valid things for students to be able to do, and all of them extend the thinking beyond some of the worksheets or that we might be relying on at this point in time as we're trying to get our feet under ourselves as we make this transition to distance learning. Secondly, we want to think about how students are supposed to interact with the given task. So we might select strategies and materials for them, or we might ask students, depending on their age and maturity and readiness levels, to select some of their own strategies for responding. So we might say, I really want a scientific lab report in response to this problem. While a student might come back and say, for this particular problem, I'd rather write a persuasive speech, or I'd rather, film a short video clip, giving my thoughts here. Either of those are acceptable. It's really up to the teacher to define what they would like to see out of students at that point in time. Students might use reading strategies to interact with some of the extended tests that we give them there. They might use investigative procedures. So oftentimes performance tasks have a strong link to either the scientific method or to some other common heuristics that we use to investigate or make sense of historical primary sources or literature. So those are some great ways to think about these as well. It's common to all performance tests, though, as students generate their responses, is we want them to think about how they're using evidence to support their thinking. So we want to make sure that our prompts are explicit in helping students do that, but also that we provide some feedback and support in allowing them to do that as well. Finally, as we talked about a little bit earlier, what formats will students use to present their response? They might choose any of those options below. They might present their solution in a more formal setting, or have a more formal paper written in this particular context. They might have a extended response to a prompt that we provide. If they're able to record a performance or something else to submit to us or some other sort of formal product, those are all valuable things as well. And the key part about performance tasks is that they let students engage in some kind of more authentic problem solving that gives some real world context for them to think in, but also gives them some voice and choice in how they do that learning. And especially at this time where we are not as pressed, for example, to cover as many standards or address as many standards or do as much with our learning, and we have a lot of time for students to go deep in things here. And performance tasks, we think, are a great opportunity for students to do that.
And Randy, just to connect to that, I was talking with a teacher the other day that was getting some better results from her kids with the short chunk due dates around the performance task, the project that she gave them, than she was with like the boards and other things like that. And her kids that didn't have the Google Classroom access on the computer were able to do the performance task as well. And one of the things that she had mentioned to me was the fact that she's been wanting to do this forever and just hasn't had the time to pull it together. So she may not be getting 100% of her kids in it yet, but she's at least having an opportunity to give them something that's different, considered more engaging, and is a dry run for her that she's like, well, hopefully then I can figure out how to do it next year when we're back to normal, whatever that might be.
Okay. And we certainly love to hear any other ideas you have about performance tasks in the chat before we go forward. Especially thinking about this time as a great opportunity to be a lab of sorts, right? As Anissa mentioned about her conversation with that teacher, this is a chance to really try a lot of things that we haven't tried before. So before we go forward in the session, I want to pause and kind of take some advantage of that discussion around that. What are some of those things that we're trying that we haven't before, whether it's in the context of performance tasks or otherwise? What are we excited about at this point in time? Okay. Anissa, what are you seeing in chat?
I am seeing. So I know a couple of the teachers are starting to kind of follow the flipped classroom model, and either sending the kids video clips of lessons or making them themselves, and then trying to have the more synchronous time or the discussion board around the response to that. And so I think it's interesting. I'm going to be interesting to see what that looks like for our low tech, and if they can watch the videos on their phone and things like that. Also, Liz Schilling started sharing personal pics and videos of her at home doing the scavenger hunt. In other words, modeling. And that is so helpful no matter what we're talking about, is modeling so that the kids really know what the expectations are. It seems like that's a common thread between a lot of people that we've talked to. How do we get those expectations of what's expected from the kids clearly communicated to them so that they start to do that and see that culture of we're still in school. We may not be in the building, but we're still in school in some way. And Destiny also talked about the kids working on a project, a performance task about Earth Day, where they create an Earth Day poster and reflect on some questions that she has about the poster, the cause that they chose.
Okay. So lots of great ideas about what you're already doing. And thank you for sharing each of those in chat. As we move forward and move into the home stretch of our session here, as we talked about a little bit earlier, we do want to give you an opportunity to share more explicitly some of the things that you're thinking about, whether about these strategies or some other experiences that you're having as well. So first things first, I want you to think about the 4 strategies we talked about here so far today: journaling, authentic reading, reflection, and performance tasks. And do a little bit of thinking about what could one of these strategies look like in your classroom and what steps might be necessary to make it happen. Feel free to go ahead and respond in chat, or if at this point, Anissa, you'd like to unmute some folks that would like to talk a little bit about some of their ideas, I'm happy to engage in some mutual conversation around that as well.
I believe anybody should be able to unmute yourself. Hit unmute all, but if you don't want to talk, you might want to mute yourself. And we've got somebody with a cool.
What is that?
Dwayne, I'm on my stuff. I'm on here till probably 4:30. Okay, bye.
Okay, Anissa, I guess I'm reflecting or talking about this. This is Elizabeth. This week I posted a picture of, I guess, rocks in Arizona where one big rock was on one side and there were 4 rocks and it was balancing. And I asked the kids to reflect on what they saw and how it relates to equations. Excellent.
Oh, great. That's a great example. Yeah, of just having the kids journaling. I think oftentimes when we think of how are you feeling today? But journaling basically just means like, how do we give kids those prompts to do the shorter writing? Either like Randy went over, either in response to a prompt like yours, a picture, or free write around the topic. So great, thank you for sharing. That was a great example. Anybody else there? Either that they're interested in what it could maybe look like, or what would be necessary in order to make your vision of how this would look. How would you make that happen? What do we have to communicate to kids? And you can use either chat or your voice. Deborah, were you about to say something? Okay, I'm just making sure. So Randy, one of the other things that came up in the chat that I wanted to bring forward that seemed like really helpful for the kids, Bryce had mentioned that because they're trying to make phone calls home because they do have quite a bit of their population without that are more low tech. He's saying that the teachers are really coming up with some good probing questions, not only for the kids, but for the parents as well. And those probing questions, those reflective questions really help to show the care, that you really do care about what they have to say. So it's a really silver lining, if you will, in this and trying to get those relationships stronger between teachers and kids and family that they can get a hold of.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing for us all to remember, Liz Schilling brought up that for our ELL kids, journaling doesn't always have to be long text. It also can be through symbols and pictures, and that's for any of our kids, but it's especially good for our ELL kids, so that they can still remain connected and get their points across without having to feel the strain of writing. One of the ELL teachers that I know, she allows the kids to write in their own language first and then try to translate as much as possible into English. But getting it in their own language first allows them to try to get the thoughts out, and then they can worry about the translation instead of trying at the same time.
Mm-hmm. One thing I love about the symbols that you bring up is that if we think about it to how a lot of us take notes, it's not always written word, it's not always long form response, or some of the ways that we respond to some of the things we see. Sometimes it is in quick bullet points, or we draw a picture to help us jog our memory about what that was about. So certainly journaling does not have to be limited to the written word, so to speak. It can be open to some of those other forms of expression as well. We do want to move forward, and we want to thank you for your time today. We do have some housekeeping to speak to on the back end here before we move forward, and then we will formally say adieu to you for this session before we see you again, hopefully in the future. Firstly, we wanted to make some extra time to talk about the feedback surveys here, and we thank you so much for those of you who have been filling them out as part of your regular attendance here. As you move forward, they shortly will be in their email, so please look out for them. We do want you, and we want to reinforce the idea that for Initiative and I, your responses are completely anonymous. We have no idea who says what. So if you are wanting more specific support, so for example, last time somebody asked us to share some slides, and I have not been able to share those slides yet because I don't know who specifically asked for that. So please do reach out to us individually when we send some of those follow-up emails so we can connect with you and give you the supports that you're asking for. We do also want to remind you and reinforce that for those of you who need printed documentation of your PL hours, depending on your state and licensure, we're happy to provide your attendance for that though, but the best evidence we have of your attendance is your response to those surveys. So we'll be using we'll be looking at each session and the surveys where you responded, and the sessions where you responded to the survey for, to help us determine how many hours you participated with us over this closure. Finally, as we think about the exit ticket, and this is one of the questions that comes up on the survey, just for you as a spot to jog some additional thinking. Suppose you wanted to implement or refine your implementation of one of these strategies in the coming weeks. What would you need to communicate to students, families, and your team to help support that change? So for example, if you were new to performance tasks and you wanted to start one in the coming weeks, not tomorrow because they do take some planning, but if you wanted to start one in the first week of May or in mid-May, what would that look like, and what would you need to talk about with your families, with perhaps your school leadership to help support that change as you execute that? And with that, I do thank you for your time today, and please look out for those surveys in your emails. I'll turn it over to Anissa for any parting shots she has or anything else she's noticed in chat before we say goodbye for the afternoon.
Parting shots makes me sound like I'm about to rag on somebody, but no, thank you guys so much. I know that we didn't get a chance to talk in detail about the performance task on purpose because we knew that needed its own session. So if you are interested, please sign up and register for Friday, even if you can't make it. That way we'll be sure to get you all the information. But it's a great way to engage the kids a little bit differently, and now we've got a little bit of brain space to do that planning that we've been wanting to do around that. If there's anything else, please, please, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We will be sending out tomorrow the video and any the chat ideas, anything like that. But if you want any additional information, please make sure that you just email us back and we can either set up a time to talk or at least just go back and forth via email. That's what we're here for, and we want to make sure we support you guys as much as we can. So thank you all so much.